self-stranger. Here, there is a moment that happens right before everything changes for a person, and it has nothing to do with their bank account. It happens in the mind first. Long before the number in the account moves, something else moves. A posture, a tone of voice, a way of looking at a menu, a store window, a bill, a stranger. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Because it sounds backwards, we are taught that wealth creates a feeling, that once you have enough, you will finally feel calm, generous, secure, unbothered by small costs, free to make decisions without flinching. But if you watch closely, actually watch the people who build real wealth instead of just having it handed to them, you notice the order is reversed. The feeling comes first. The feeling makes the wealth possible. Not the other way around. This is not a video about manifesting money by thinking happy thoughts. It is not a fantasy about pretending your bank account is full when it isn't. It is something more precise and more useful than that. It is about understanding that wealth is, at its core, a psychological operating system for it is a financial outcome, the habits, decisions, risk tolerance, patience, and self-respect that produce money are downstream of an internal state, and that internal state can be built deliberately, starting today, regardless of your current numbers. So let's actually take this apart and understand how it works, because once you see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it. Start with a basic observation about human behavior. People act in accordance with their self-image, not their goals, not their to-do lists, their self-image. If you see yourself as someone who is disorganized, you will unconsciously recreate disorganization, even when you are trying hard to be organized, because your brain is constantly working to keep your outer world consistent with your inner identity. This is not a flaw in your willpower. It is a feature of how identity works. Psychologists have long observed that people behave in ways that confirm what they already believe about themselves, even when that belief is limiting or painful, because the discomfort of behaving out of character is often greater than the discomfort of staying stuck. Your brain would rather be consistently unhappy than inconsistently uncertain. Now apply this to money. If your internal identity is someone who struggles financially, someone who is bad with money, someone who never has enough, every decision you make will quietly, invisibly, be steered back toward proving that identity right. You will find ways to spend that undo your savings. You will hesitate on opportunities that could have paid off. You will negotiate poorly, not because you lack the skill, but because some part of you does not believe you deserve the better outcome. And self-sabotage is just identity, doing its job of keeping things consistent. This is why so many lottery winners and sudden windfall recipients end up back where they started within a few years. The money changed. The identity did not, and identity always wins the long game. This is the actual reason feel wealthy before you are wealthy. Is not some feel-good platitude. It is a description of the mechanism that has to happen first, because identity precedes behavior, and behavior precedes results. If you wait for the results to change your identity, you are relying on an outcome you don't yet have the internal architecture to sustain, even if you get lucky enough to receive it. But if you build the identity first, the results become almost a formality. They are the natural output of a system that is already aligned. So what does it actually mean to feel wealthy when you are not, in fact, currently wealthy? It does not mean lying to yourself. It does not mean pretending your rent isn't due, or spending money you don't have to match the vibe. That is the cartoon version of this idea, and it is dangerous. Actual wealth feeling is not about the presence of money. It is about the presence of specific internal states that wealthy-minded people carry, regardless of their current bank balance. Let's name them one at a time, because each one is trainable. The first is enoughness. Wealthy-minded people, even before they have much, operate from a baseline sense that they are enough, that their worth is not contingent on their net worth. This might sound disconnected from finance, but it is the single most load-bearing belief in the entire structure. If your sense of self-worth is tied to your financial status, every dip, every slow month, every comparison to someone doing better becomes a threat to your identity itself. Not just a number on a page. That kind of pressure produces panic. Decisions produce loss, confirms the fear, deepens the identity of not enoughness. It is a closed loop. Enoughness breaks the loop because it lets you look at a financial setback and think, that was a bad month, instead of, I am a failure, which are two completely different starting points for what you do next. The second is abundance thinking, which is not the same as recklessness. Abundance thinking is the quiet, underlying assumption that resources, opportunities, and good outcomes are not fundamentally scarce, that there is more where that came from, that one closed door does not mean all doors are closing. Scarcity thinking, by contrast, treats every dollar spent as a wound, every opportunity lost as final, every no as evidence of a hostile universe. People operating from scarcity grip too tightly. They underprice their work because they're terrified of losing the sale. They avoid investing in themselves because spending feels like bleeding. They say yes to bad deals because they don't trust that better ones are coming. Ironically, this grip is what keeps them poor, because desperation is visible, and desperate energy repels the very opportunities it's chasing. Abundance thinking, cultivated deliberately, produces the opposite: patience, better negotiating position, the willingness to walk away from a bad deal because you trust something better exists. The third is what we might call proactive stewardship, the identity of someone who manages resources with care and intention, rather than either hoarding them out of fear or letting them slip away out of carelessness. Wealthy-minded people, at every income level, tend to know where their money goes, not because they are rich enough to have an accountant, but because tracking, planning, and intentional allocation is itself a wealth behavior that can be practiced with $50 just as easily as with $50,000. This is a crucial point because many people wait to get serious about money until they have more of it, not realizing that the seriousness itself is the prerequisite, not the reward. The fourth is long-term orientation, sometimes called future self-trust. This is the capacity to make a decision today that benefits a version of you that doesn't exist yet, and to actually believe that future self is worth the sacrifice. People with a poverty identity often struggle with this, not from a lack of intelligence, but because chronic scarcity, whether financial or emotional, trains the brain to prioritize immediate relief over long-term gain. This isn't a moral failing. It's a survival adaptation. But it can be retrained deliberately by practicing small acts of delayed gratification and consciously narrating to yourself what you are building, not just what you are giving up. The fifth, and maybe the most overlooked, is generosity as a felt experience rather than a financial threshold. People often believe they'll become generous once they have more, but generosity, like every other trait discussed here, is a practiced identity, not an automatic unlock that arrives with a bigger paycheck. Someone who cannot bring themselves to buy a coffee for a friend, when they have $30 in their account, will very likely still struggle to be generous when they have 30,000, because the constriction is internal, not external. Conversely, people who practice generosity even in lean seasons, who tip well when they can, who share resources, who operate from "there's enough to go around," tend to build the very trust, reputation, and relational capital that produces opportunities later. Generosity is not the reward of wealth. It is one of the engines of it. Now, here is where this gets practical, because understanding the mechanism is only useful if you can actually install it. So let's talk about how you build a wealthy identity, starting from wherever you are right now, even if wherever you are is genuinely tight, stressful, or uncertain. The first practice is what could be called evidence collection. Your brain does not believe abstract affirmations. Telling yourself, "I am wealthy," while your account says otherwise, creates cognitive dissonance that your brain will usually resolve by rejecting the statement, not by changing your identity. What actually works is collecting small, real pieces of evidence that support the identity you're building. Did you make a thoughtful financial decision today? Even a small one? That's evidence. Did you resist an impulsive purchase because it didn't serve your future self? Evidence. Did you have a conversation about money without shame or panic? Evidence. The identity shift doesn't happen through declaration. It happens through accumulation of small, self-generated proof. The second practice is language correction. Pay close attention to the sentences you say about money, out loud and internally. "I can't afford that" is a dead-end sentence. It closes the mental door immediately and stops any further problem solving. A wealthier internal frame asks instead, "How could I afford that if I wanted to?" which keeps the brain in a resourceful generative state rather than a shut-down, defeated one. This isn't about lying to yourself about your current constraints. It's about staying in a problem-solving posture rather than a helpless one. The words you use are not neutral. They are training data for your own nervous system. The third practice is deliberate exposure. If your relationship with money is built entirely around avoidance, not looking at your accounts, not opening bills, not making a budget because it's too stressful, you are reinforcing a scarcity identity through avoidance itself. Wealthy-minded people, even ones who don't have much, tend to look directly at their numbers. They know their situation. Facing your numbers regularly, without spiraling into shame about them, is itself an act of identity building. It says, internally, "I am someone who handles this," rather than, "I am someone this happens to." The fourth practice is upgrading your inputs, meaning the media, conversations, and environments you allow to shape your thinking. If you are constantly consuming content that reinforces scarcity, financial doom, comparison, and hopelessness, your nervous system will marinate in that frequency regardless of your actual circumstances. This doesn't mean ignoring real economic difficulty or pretending problems away. It means being intentional about balancing realism with exposure to people, ideas, and stories that demonstrate what's possible. So your brain has reference points for growth, not just reference points for struggle. The fifth practice is treating your future self as a real person you have a relationship with, not an abstract hypothetical before a purchase, before a decision. Ask a simple but powerful question. Is this decision something my future self will thank me for, or something they'll have to clean up after? This single habit, practiced consistently, quietly rewires the delayed gratification muscle that so much financial stability depends on, and it does so without requiring willpower alone, because it reframes the decision as a relationship rather than a restriction. It's worth pausing here to address the obvious tension. None of this means struggle isn't real, or that mindset alone pays rent. Systemic barriers exist. Bad luck exists. Some people are dealt much harder hands than others, and no amount of internal reframing erases a genuinely unjust or difficult material circumstance. This isn't a claim that psychology overrides economics. It's a claim about what is within your control inside whatever circumstance you're in, and about which internal posture makes you more likely to recognize and act on the opportunities that do exist, rather than missing them because scarcity has narrowed your vision. Two people in the exact same financial situation will often make very different decisions and end up in very different places 5 years later, and the difference is rarely intelligence or luck alone. It's frequently this internal architecture quietly doing its work in the background of every decision. There's also a deeper layer worth sitting with, which is the relationship between feeling wealthy and feeling safe. A lot of scarcity identity isn't actually about money at all. It's about an old, learned belief that resources are unreliable, that things can be taken away, that security is fragile. This often traces back to early experiences, whether financial instability in childhood, watching caregivers struggle, or simply absorbing an anxious relationship with money from the environment you grew up in. Recognizing this doesn't mean blaming your past. It means understanding that some of the tightness you feel around money might not even be about the current numbers, but about an old nervous system pattern that's still running in the background, treating every financial moment like an emergency. Naming that pattern gently, without judgment, is often the first real step toward loosening its grip. There's a particular kind of person worth studying here. The person who, by any objective measure, doesn't have much, but who carries themselves with a kind of quiet dignity around money. They're not flashy, they're not pretending, but they don't flinch when the bill comes. They don't apologize for existing in expensive spaces. They negotiate their worth without shame. If you've ever met someone like this, you'll notice something interesting. People trust them with opportunities. Employers want to give them raises. Clients want to pay them well. This isn't coincidence. Confidence, when it's rooted in genuine self-respect rather than arrogance, is magnetic to opportunity, because people can sense the difference between someone operating from fear and someone operating from grounded self-worth, and they generally prefer to do business with the latter. This brings us to something important about the difference between confidence and denial. Feeling wealthy before you are wealthy does not mean ignoring your actual numbers or spending beyond your means to act the part. That version of the idea, the one that shows up as fake luxury, borrowed status, and performative spending, is actually scarcity in disguise. It's still driven by fear, just aimed outward instead of inward, trying to convince others of a wealth you don't have, instead of building a genuine internal steadiness. The real practice is a little quieter and less performative than that. It looks like paying your bills on time, even when it's tight, because you respect yourself enough to stay current. It looks like saving something, even a small amount, because you believe your future matters. It looks like not comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter N20. It looks like treating money as a tool you're learning to use skillfully, rather than a verdict on your worth as a person. Let's talk about time horizon, because this is where a lot of people get stuck. Feeling wealthy before you are wealthy requires holding two things at once, which is genuinely difficult. You have to be honest about your current constraints, while simultaneously operating from the identity of someone whose circumstances are temporary and improvable. This is not denial. It's what psychologists sometimes describe as a growth-oriented identity, as opposed to a fixed one. A person with a fixed scarcity identity looks at their current bank balance and thinks, "This is who I am." A person with a growth-oriented wealth identity looks at the same number and thinks, "This is where I am right now." And it's data, not identity. That distinction between where you are and who you are is enormously important, and it's one you have to actively practice making, because the brain's default is to collapse the two into one. Consider how this plays out in negotiation, because it's one of the clearest places. This internal state becomes external results. Someone operating from scarcity walks into a salary negotiation already defeated, already grateful just to be considered, already prepared to accept whatever is offered, because asking for more feels dangerous, like it might jeopardize the whole opportunity. Someone operating from a wealth identity, even if their current bank account is thin, walks in from a place of, what is fair and what do I bring to this? Not from desperation, but from grounded self-assessment. The offer that comes back is very often different, not because the second person is objectively more skilled, but because negotiators respond to perceived value, and perceived value is heavily shaped by the energy the other person is radiating. This single dynamic alone, repeated across a career, across multiple negotiations, across pricing decisions, if you're self-employed, compounds into massively different financial trajectories over time. Let's also talk about spending, because feeling wealthy changes not how much you spend, but how you spend. Scarcity spending is reactive. It's driven by emotional relief, comparison, or fear of missing out, and it often produces regret shortly after. Wealth-minded spending, even on a tight budget, is intentional. It asks, does this align with what I actually value, rather than, can I technically afford this right now? This is why two people with the exact same income can have wildly different financial outcomes. One is spending to soothe an anxious identity. The other is spending, even modestly, in alignment with a clear sense of what actually matters to them. The second approach, practiced consistently, builds both financial stability and a much deeper sense of control, because control comes from alignment, not from restriction. There is also something to be said here about comparison, because comparison is one of the fastest ways to collapse a wealth identity back into scarcity. Social media in particular has created an environment where everyone is seeing a curated highlight reel of other people's financial peaks without any of the context, debt, stress, or luck involved. Measuring your internal state against someone else's external display is a losing game, because you are comparing your full, complicated reality to their edited fragment. Wealthy-minded people over time learn to measure progress against their own past self, not against a stranger's performance. Am I more financially capable than I was a year ago? Have I built better habits than I had before? That is the only comparison that produces useful information. Every other comparison just produces static. As we come toward the end of this, it's worth returning to the central idea, because it's easy to intellectually agree with something like this and still not actually live it. Feeling wealthy before you are wealthy is not a trick. And it is not magical thinking. It is the recognition that wealth, at its root, is a set of internal patterns: self-worth, patience, generosity, intentionality, future orientation that produce specific external behaviors, and those behaviors, repeated over time, produce financial results. The order matters. You cannot skip the internal work and expect the external results to hold, because even if money arrives without the identity shift, the identity will eventually pull the money back down to match it. This is why building the internal state first isn't just a nice philosophy. It's the actual mechanism by which sustainable wealth gets built at any income level, starting from any circumstance. So here is the real invitation underneath everything we've walked through. You do not need to wait for a bigger paycheck to start practicing enoughness. You do not need a business success to start practicing generosity. You do not need a full emergency fund to start practicing intentional spending. You do not need a promotion to start speaking about money with confidence instead of apology. Every single one of these practices is available to you today, exactly where you are, with exactly what you have. And the strange, almost paradoxical truth is that practicing them now, before the external results arrive, is precisely what makes those results possible in the first place. The feeling is not the reward waiting at the end of the journey. The feeling is the vehicle that gets you there. Whatever your numbers look like today, you can begin building the internal architecture of wealth right now, quietly, without announcing it to anyone, without pretending, without denial, just small, honest, repeated choices that say internally, I am someone who handles this well. Over time, that identity stops being an aspiration and starts being simply true, and by the time the external results catch up, which they will, you won't even need convincing. You'll already recognize yourself.